Between 1935 and 1938, an unknown killer dismembered at least 12 people, possibly more, and left their bodies in pieces around the city of Cleveland, Ohio. The case drew in one of the most famous lawmen in America, destroyed a promising detective's career, led to mass incarcerations of homeless men, and was never solved. It remains one of the most disturbing and most studied unsolved serial murder cases in American history. This is the story of the Cleveland Torso Murders. Chapter 1. The Butcher Introduces Himself. On the 23rd of September, 1935, the decapitated torso of a man was found in the Kingsbury Run Ravine, a long, desolate gulch that cut through the eastern side of Cleveland, running from the city's wealthier neighborhoods down toward its industrial waterfront. The head was found nearby, buried in sand. The body had been drained of blood with surgical precision before being left there. The victim was never identified. He was listed simply as John Doe. 3 months later, in January of 1936, another male torso was found in the same ravine. This victim was also decapitated. He was also never identified. 2 victims in 3 months, both male, both dismembered with the same apparent skill, both found in the same gulch. Investigators were beginning to understand they had a serious problem. Then, in September of 1936, 2 boys playing near Kingsbury Run discovered a severed head. A second head was found nearby shortly afterward. The bodies of 2 men, both decapitated, both dismembered, both drained of blood before death according to the medical examiner, were found in the ravine. Neither victim was ever identified. The Cleveland press had already coined the term the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, and the name was now everywhere. What distinguished the Torso murders from other serial killings of the era was the surgical nature of the dismemberment. Medical examiners noted with consistency that the cuts were precise, the joints cleanly disarticulated, and the bodies drained of blood in ways suggesting the victims were killed and processed in a location separate from where they were found. This was not the work of someone in a frenzy. This was organized, deliberate, and carried out by someone with anatomical knowledge, possibly a surgeon, a butcher, or a medical professional of some kind. Chapter 2. The Safety Director and the Detective. Eliot Ness was the Director of Public Safety for Cleveland when the Torso murders were at their peak. He had become nationally famous for his work with the Untouchables in Chicago, the federal team that had helped bring down Al Capone. In Cleveland, he had been hired to clean up a police department infamous for corruption, and by many accounts he did a creditable job of that. But the Torso murders became his most public challenge, and they were a challenge he ultimately failed to meet. Ness's involvement in the investigation is remembered today partly because of its theatrical elements. He personally supervised the torching of the Kingsbury Run shantytown in 1938, a move aimed at denying the killer a hunting ground among Cleveland's homeless population, but which displaced hundreds of destitute men and was widely criticized even at the time as cruel and ineffective. It said something about the desperation of the investigation by that point. The city's most prominent law enforcement official was burning down camps for the homeless. The detective most consistently and seriously engaged with the Torso murders was a man named Peter Murillo, who spent years on the case, often working unpaid long after his official involvement. Murillo developed a strong suspect, a man named Frank Dolezal, a Bohemian immigrant who had known several of the victims and lived in the neighborhood where some had been seen last. In August of 1939, Dolezal was arrested. He eventually confessed, though the confession was widely regarded as coerced, and the details in it were inconsistent with the known facts of the murders. Dolezal died in custody in August of 1939 before he could be tried, officially by suicide. though the circumstances prompted accusations of abuse and neglect that were never fully resolved. Murillo never accepted that Dolezal was the torso killer. He spent the rest of his career and much of his retirement pursuing other suspects. If you're enjoying this and want to see more deep dives into history's most baffling cases, please subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Chapter 3: The Doctor in the Shadows. The suspect that has attracted the most sustained, serious attention over the decades is not Frank Dolezal. It is a man named Francis Sweeney. Sweeney was a physician, a surgeon in fact, and a cousin by marriage of a United States congressman named Martin Sweeney, who was one of Eliot Ness's most prominent political critics in Cleveland. The connection between Ness's most serious private suspect and his most vocal public enemy was something Ness found himself unable to act on without extraordinary care. Ness privately interrogated Sweeney for several days in May of 1938 with the assistance of Dr. Royal Grossman, a psychiatrist and a polygraph examiner. By Ness's own account, recorded in private notes that were not made public for decades, Sweeney failed the polygraph examination repeatedly, and under questioning gave responses that deeply concerned the investigators. Ness believed, privately and apparently strongly, that Sweeney was the torso killer. But there was a problem. Sweeney had connections, a family with political reach, and a history of mental illness. He had already been voluntarily institutionalized on at least one occasion. Within weeks of the secret interrogation, Sweeney voluntarily committed himself to a veterans hospital in Sandusky, Ohio. The torso murders effectively stopped. The last confirmed torso murder in Cleveland took place in August of 1938, the same year as the interrogation. From the Veterans Hospital and from subsequent institutions, Sweeney sent a series of taunting postcards to Eliot Ness over the following years. The postcards were bizarre and suggestive, not explicit confessions, but the kind of communication a man makes when he knows he cannot be touched. Ness kept every one of them. They were found in his personal files after his death. Sweeney was never arrested, never charged, and never publicly named as a suspect during his lifetime. Ness's inability to build a chargeable case against a politically connected physician was a failure that haunted him. It contributed to his declining political fortunes in Cleveland, and when he ran for mayor in 1947, he lost. He died in 1957, broke and largely forgotten by the public that had once celebrated him. Chapter 4: The Victims Who Were Never Named. One of the most unsettling aspects of the Cleveland torso murders is how many of the victims were never identified. Of the 12 officially attributed victims, only 3 were ever given names. The rest went to their graves as John Does and Jane Does, recorded by case numbers in police files. The victims were predominantly from the margins of Cleveland society: transient workers, the homeless, people whose disappearances would not immediately trigger an organized search. The Kingsbury Run ravine itself was a place where those on the fringes gathered. It was a route for freight trains, and its banks were populated by those who rode the rails and those who had no other shelter. The killer had chosen his hunting ground deliberately. The victims were people the city was less inclined to notice were missing, and that calculated choice of victim gave the killer a significant operational advantage. Modern forensic re-examination of the case has been carried out by several independent researchers. The most thorough published work on the case is a book by James Jesson Battle, whose decades of research constitute the most detailed account of the investigation. Battle concluded that the evidence pointing towards Sweeney was compelling but circumstantial, and that the political complications around him had genuinely hampered the investigation in ways that were not recovered from. The question of whether there were additional victims beyond the 12 official cases has been debated. Some researchers believe the actual count may be higher, with other dismemberment murders in the region in the 1930s potentially attributable to the same hand. A case from 1934, before the official first victim, involved remains found on a Lake Erie beach that some investigators have linked to the same killer. The Cleveland torso murders have never been officially closed. Francis Sweeney died in a veterans hospital in 1964. The postcards he sent to Ness are held in the Western Reserve Historical Society archives in Cleveland. The 12 official victims include 9 whose names we still do not know. And the case, despite being nearly 90 years old, is still studied, still debated, and still haunting. The Cleveland torso murders saw at least 12 people dismembered with surgical precision between 1935 and 1938, and despite an investigation led by the famous Eliot Ness, one coerced confession from a man who died in custody, and a private interrogation of a prime suspect who then committed himself to a mental institution and mocked investigators with postcards for years afterward. The butcher of Kingsbury Run was never brought to justice. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel. You can also watch more crime videos like this one by clicking on screen.